My name is Emily, and I am a passionate writer. Dark, wavy hair falls wildly over my shoulders, and my eyes always carry a curious expression. I am drawn to the mysteries of life and have always had a deep fascination with the unknown and the unexplained. My home, a picturesque cottage, is surrounded by dense trees and lush, mossy landscapes. The birds sing me their stories, and the forest whispers its secrets to me. The walls of my home are filled with bookshelves overflowing with classics and mysteries. My antique desk is the centerpiece of my writing room, where I brood over stories for hours and immerse myself in foreign worlds. Solitude and creativity are my faithful companions, and in this seclusion, I find the peace to create stories. My curiosity and imagination lead me to strange findings from the nearby forest, which I lovingly keep in my cottage. It was a quiet day when I received the mysterious invitation. The sun bathed the room in golden light as I pulled the blood-splattered parchment from the mailbox. A shiver ran down my spine as I read the details on the invitation. The words, "On the edge of the forest, October 31st, had something eerie about them. But my curiosity outweighed my fears. This invitation had appeared out of nowhere, with no sender, no explanation. It was as if the forest itself had delivered it to me. A tingle of adventure ran through me, and I knew I had to follow this invitation to uncover the secrets it held. Determined and filled with a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty, I began preparations for my journey to the remote forest house. Thoughts of the upcoming Halloween party and the mysterious invitation made my heart beat faster as I packed my bag and set off. The forest that stretched around my cottage revealed a dark side that evening. The trees stood dense and dark, their branches seeming to reach like bony fingers into the sky. The twilight shining through the leaves painted strange shadows on the ground, and the silence of the forest was only interrupted by the occasional rustling of leaves and the mysterious whispering of the wind. It was as if the forest itself was guarding its secrets. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more impenetrable the darkness became. The path I followed was narrow and covered in moss, and I could hear the faint crunch of leaves under my shoes. The cold of the night crept through my clothing, and I could see my own breath. When I finally reached the forest house, the sun had long set, and the moon hung low in the sky, as if it were a silent witness to this mysterious gathering. The structure of the house seemed like something out of a spooky tale, overgrown with ivy and forgotten by time. It was as if the house came from another time, as if it had always stood here, unchanged and unimpressed by the passing years. The only sign of human life was the flickering light emanating from one of the windows inside the manor. It was an eerie glow that bathed the surrounding forest in a spooky light. The trees seemed to press closer to the house, as if they were curious to eavesdrop on what was happening inside. And I, full of determination and a hint of fear, stepped through the heavy creaking door and into the darkness of the manor, ready to uncover the mystery of this eerie invitation. I entered the threshold of the old mansion with a strange feeling, as if time itself stood still in this place. The hallway was dim, the walls covered with peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked under my steps. Dust danced in the weak light of my flashlight, which I had turned on to dispel the darkness. The interior of the mansion seemed as if it had been penetrated by the shadows of the forest. Old furniture stood abandoned and covered with sheets, as if they were waiting for their former inhabitants. Pictures of bygone eras hung on the walls, the faces of people long deceased. Their gazes seemed to follow me as I ventured deeper into the mansion. The whisper of the forest and the rustling of leaves were just as present inside as outside. It was as if nature itself had found a way to invade this building. The wind blew through the open windows, and the gentle moaning of the house sounded like a distant sigh. Finally, I entered a room where the other guests of the party had gathered. They wore strange masks and eerie costumes inspired by dark tales. The masks seemed to merge with their faces, and their eyes stared at me through the dark openings as if they could peer into my soul. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and I felt that something eerie was happening here. The conversations of the guests were subdued and tinged with a touch of darkness. I wondered what I was doing here, in this abandoned mansion, surrounded by people whose intentions and identities were shrouded in mystery. The party began, and the stories being told were disturbing. The guests spoke of ghosts haunting the forest, of curses and mysterious disappearances. The more they spoke, the more I felt the darkness of the forest creeping into the mansion as if it wanted to swallow me. And I couldn't help but wonder if I had stumbled into a story I should never have entered. The atmosphere in the room grew eerier with every story the guests told. In their strange masks and eerie costumes, they seemed like spirits who had risen from the darkness of the forest into this old mansion. The masks appeared to meld with their faces, and their eyes sparkled from the dark openings as if they could peer into my soul. As I listened to the grim tales, I felt the darkness of the forest spreading throughout the room. The candles flickered irregularly, and the guests' conversations grew quieter, as if the darkness itself was stifling their words. Stories of lost souls wandering in the forest, of ancient curses haunting this place, and of mysterious disappearances that were never solved filled the room. The tales of horror were accompanied by a strange hissing and rustling in the background, as if the forest itself was reacting to the narratives. A shiver ran down my spine, and the question of the origin of the invitation and the true intentions of the hosts came to the forefront. I couldn't help but wonder who these mysterious guests were and what they truly had in mind. The darkness and the secrets around me felt suffocating. Time passed, and the lights in the room flickered eerily, as if touched by an invisible hand. The guests' conversations grew even quieter, and their masks seemed to cling closer to their faces, making it impossible to discern the true emotions in their gazes. The darkness of the forest began to infiltrate the room, and I felt it enveloping me. The party seemed to be turning into a sinister ceremony, and I felt trapped, as if I had stumbled into a web of secrets and shadows. The hosts spoke in hushed, ominous voices and revealed the true purpose of the party, an ancient game rooted in the shadows of the forest. They called it the Game of Souls. The rules were simple yet eerie. Each guest was to tell a story, a tale of fear and horror, and the hosts would decide who had told the most chilling story. The winner was supposed to be rewarded, but no one knew what this reward would be. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room, and I felt the darkness of the forest infiltrating my thoughts. I was trapped in this macabre game where the boundaries between reality and fiction blurred. The first guest began to tell his story, and the words he chose seemed to come to life. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and I could practically taste the darkness of the forest. I felt compelled to contribute my own story, and so I began to narrate, my words permeated by the darkness of the forest and the secrets it held. As the stories grew increasingly eerie, I felt the darkness closing in around me, and I could sense the gaze of the hosts resting on me. The game had commenced, and I had no idea where it would lead us. With each story told, it seemed the darkness deepened, and I had a premonition that this party was more than it appeared to be. As the stories in the room grew increasingly eerie and darker, I felt the darkness enveloping me. The words of the other guests seemed to come to life, and I could sense the presence of the forest that stretched outside more and more vividly. The hosts' gazes were fixed on me, and I knew my moment had arrived. With a trembling voice, I began to tell my story, and my words were permeated by the darkness of the forest and the secrets it held. I narrated a tale of an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, of mysterious lights that lit up the night, and of the shadows lurking in the trees. As I spoke, I felt the darkness intensifying, and the atmosphere in the room became even more suffocating. The hosts seemed to be absorbing every one of my words, and I could no longer bear the sight of their sinister masks. Finally, I concluded my story, and an uneasy silence fell over the room. The hosts whispered among themselves, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. Then they revealed the true purpose of the game. The hosts explained that the stories told had summoned the darkness of the forest. They had conjured the spirits and shadows of the woods and would now be haunted by them. The darkness they had so eagerly sought would now consume them. Panic seized the guests, and the darkness in the room suddenly intensified. The lights flickered wildly, and an icy wind blew through the room. The hosts' masks began to melt, revealing their distorted faces beneath. I felt the darkness enveloping me and realized that this was the moment of truth. The hosts had unveiled the true horror of this party, and the darkness of the forest seemed to be spreading within the mansion. The question now was whether we could escape the impending doom, or if we would be forever trapped in the shadows of the woods. The darkness that filled the room seemed to come alive. The candles flickered wildly, and the icy wind that swept through the space made us shiver. The hosts' masks had dissolved, and their distorted faces glowed in the darkness. Panic and despair overcame the guests as they realized that the stories they had told had indeed summoned the shadows of the forest. Screams and curses filled the room as the darkness closed in around the guests, seeming to suffocate them. Some attempted to escape, but the doors and windows appeared to be sealed, as if the forest itself had locked them. I could feel the coldness of the darkness on my skin and hear strange sounds emanating from the shadows. Ghostly apparitions began to take shape, and I could discern the shadowy outlines of creatures emerging from the darkness. The hosts, who had revealed the true horror of this party, seemed to be engulfed by the shadows, and I realized that we had to fight for our lives. It was a battle against the darkness of the forest that we had never wanted, but now seemed inevitable. I searched for an escape, a way to evade the darkness. I seized a candle and attempted to illuminate the room, but the flames flickered wildly and threatened to extinguish at any moment. Amidst the chaos and despair, I discovered a hidden passage leading to a cellar. Without hesitation, I descended the stairs, followed by a few other guests. The cellar was dark, but I could sense that the darkness there was less menacing than on the ground floor. We heard the cries of those who had stayed behind, and the lament of the shadows that seemed to engulf them. The fight for survival had begun, and we didn't know if we would ever see daylight again. In the cellar, we searched for an escape, a way to evade the darkness of the forest. We had lost the game of souls, and now we fought to escape our own damnation. But the darkness was pervasive, and the shadows of the forest seemed inexorably to pursue us. In the cellar, we found temporary refuge from the relentless darkness that had filled the mansion. Yet the cries and laments of those who remained upstairs echoed in our ears, reminding us that the darkness of the forest couldn't be so easily defeated. The cellar door appeared to be locked, and we found no way out of the gloomy dungeon. The candle I held provided only weak light, and the shadows that gathered in the corners seemed to come to life. We wondered if there was any way to escape this darkness at all. As we sat in the dark, we began to search for clues that might free us from this seemingly hopeless situation. In the dim glow of the candle, we discovered old records and books that were gathering dust on a shelf. The pages of these books were covered in strange symbols and mysterious texts. I could feel the darkness outside pressing against the cellar door as if it would break through at any moment. Desperation overcame us as we flipped through the old records and came across an image that depicted the darkness of the forest. It showed an ancient tree surrounded by spirits and shadows. We realized that we had indeed summoned the darkness of the forest by telling our stories. The darkness was not merely a fictional element of our narratives, but a real and dangerous force that held us captive. We had to find a way to overcome this darkness before it consumed us. Guided by the drawing in the book, we decided to locate the source of the darkness, the ancient tree standing at the center of the forest. Perhaps there was a way to banish the darkness there. The candle illuminated our path as we set out to combat the darkness that we had brought upon ourselves. The path through the cellar eventually led us out into the forest, and we found ourselves surrounded by the eerie darkness that filled the woods. The shadows and spirits we had summoned seemed to pursue us, and we knew that the battle for survival was far from over. Our only hope lay in unraveling the mystery of the darkness and defeating the darkness of the forest before it swallowed us forever. The forest enveloped us with its impenetrable darkness, and the shadows seemed to follow us every step of the way. We clung to the candle, its flames fighting against the icy wind that swept through the trees. The drawing from the book guided us deeper into the forest, to an ancient tree that stood at the center of the woods. It was surrounded by an aura of dread and mystery, and spirits and shadows seemed to gather around it. It was the tree we had described in our stories, and it was the source of the darkness. As we drew closer to the tree, the threat emanating from it became palpable. The rustling of the leaves sounded like soft whispers, and the branches of the tree seemed to stretch out as if to welcome us. But we knew there would be no friendly reception. We lit several candles to illuminate the area around the tree. In their feeble light, we could see the shadows and spirits clearly, swirling around the tree. The darkness seemed even more intense in their proximity, and we felt that we were heading towards the final showdown with the darkness. Our only hope lay in unraveling the mystery of this tree and vanquishing the darkness. We began deciphering the symbolism and inscriptions on the tree, slowly realizing that the tree was an ancient relic that had been revered and feared by the inhabitants of the forest for centuries. We learned that the tree served as a gateway to another world, a world of shadows and horror. It was a prison for the darkness, and our stories had inadvertently opened the door to this prison. Now, it was up to us to seal the door once more and banish the darkness. In a final desperate effort, we kindled one last powerful candle, and its flames seemed to repel the darkness. We recited the ancient rituals and symbols we had found in the records, and slowly, piece by piece, the tree began to tremble, and the darkness around it started to recede. The tree, which had once confined the darkness, seemed to return to its former state, and the shadows and spirits vanished. It was as if the darkness of the forest had been defeated, and we could feel the air growing lighter as the darkness dissolved. Exhausted and relieved, we left the Tree of Dread and returned to the mansion. The darkness we had inadvertently summoned had been vanquished, and the shadows of the forest appeared to retreat. However, the price we paid for our salvation was high. The memories of the eerie party and the darkness of the forest would accompany us forever. We had unraveled the secret of the darkness and defeated the darkness of the forest, but the scars it had left behind would never heal. After defeating the ancient tree and banishing the darkness of the forest, we returned to the mansion. The darkness seemed to recede, and the forest lost its menacing aura. The mansion was still and silent, and the atmosphere was tense. The doors and windows no longer appeared to be locked, and we entered to see what had become of the other guests. We found the mansion deserted, as if the guests and hosts had never existed. Yet the memories of the eerie party and the darkness of the forest would accompany us forever. We had unraveled the secret of the darkness and defeated the darkness of the forest, but the scars it had left behind would never heal. As we left the mansion and crossed through the forest, we felt that the darkness would forever remain a part of us. The memories of the eerie party and the shadowy figures would never leave us. We had discovered the secret of the darkness, but at what cost? The forest would never be the same again, and the darkness would always lurk in the shadows.